Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here tonight with all of you. It's going to be a great, great show. Got some good stuff to talk to you about tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it. Let's have a great show.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. I am so glad to be here with you tonight. We are streaming right now on Facebook. We are streaming right now on Rockfin. We are streaming right now on YouTube. We are streaming afterwards. This gets uploaded to Rumble and Odyssey. We are everywhere. Videos are posted or menaced by international communism. Bicycle Repairman is there to, that's a Monty Python reference. Stupid. Anyway, welcome everybody. So glad to be with you here tonight. Got a few things to talk to you about. It's summertime here in New York. Shout out to Space LaRouche, good friend. Got to spend some time with you this afternoon. That was really nice to walk in the lovely weather. That was really, really great. And we're just trying to keep our attitude positive. We're trying to focus on the job that we can do to stop the danger of a new world war, to spread anti-imperialism, etc. If you are a member of the Center for Political Innovation, make sure you come out to join us on Saturday, New York City Peace March. We are going to organize our kind of progressive anti-imperialist contingent to participate in that very important interfaith religious gathering that's happening at the UN on Saturday. We're working on that. That's going to be awesome. We may have some very special guests there. Fingers crossed. Very excited to hear about that. Also, if you're a member of the Center for Political Innovation, make sure that you sign up to come to our great weekend workshop that we are doing at the end of June. It is going to be awesome. It'll be June 23rd, 24th, 25th in the state of Missouri near St. Louis. It is going to be awesome. So if you're a member, make sure that you are available. It'll be great. Everyone who comes will get a free copy of my new book. And we're going to, learn some great things about how to build our organization, group bonding activities, workshops. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. So if you are not yet part of the awesome organization known as the Center for Political Innovation, all you've got to do is sign up. We had somebody join just today. We had someone join a few days ago. Memberships are rolling in. Our organization is marching ahead. We will build a movement against fascism, against war, against the low-wage police state, against the danger of World War III. Join the Center for Political Innovation. We could always use you as a member. Great documentary down below that Peter Coffin made all about CPI and the great work that we do. You'll see an intimate look, just a beautiful documentary that Peter Coffin made about what our organization is like. Just a great group of folks that we have, all over the country. We got folks in California. We got folks in Oregon. We got folks in Illinois, Chicago, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas. We got folks in Boston. We got folks in New York City. We got folks in New Jersey. We got folks in the South. We got folks around the country. We are building a nationwide movement. We got people supporting us in different countries. We got Canadians who like us. We got Australians who like us. We got Russians who like us. We got Chinese who like us. We got people in the Philippines who like what we do. Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. We are getting shit done, and we are so happy about it. And more people are noticing the great work that we are doing. And we're going to have an important intervention this Saturday coming up in New York City. Contact me if you want to be involved. That's going to be great. And we're going to also have a great workshop coming up. And it looks like towards the end of the summer, probably August or September, we're going to be in Portland, Oregon with Scott Ritter. That's going to be awesome. So great stuff is happening. We're marching ahead as an organization. We got great, important things to do. So, yeah. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things on these streams, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks. And while I am giving my opening remarks, I'm writing down the super chat questions that people want me to answer in the second half of the show. I'm typing them down. So if there's something you want me to talk about as I'm giving my opening remarks, shoot me a super chat. I type it down. Then when we reach the halfway mark in the show, at that point, I then do a roll call where we find out who it is on the other side of the camera. We find out who's there, who's watching. I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. It's really, really awesome and exciting. And then after that, then I start answering super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, boom, shoot me a super chat. I will answer it. I will do my best to answer it. Most of the time, I'll give you some kind of answer. Very rarely is there one I have to skip. It happens every so often. It happens, but it's rare. But it happens. Rarely there is one I have to skip. But for the most part, I answer your super chat questions. And it is you guys who make the second half of our program what it is. Every so often, people throw me a super chat that just gets me rolling. And I got plenty to say. And it's awesome. And the chemistry is going. And the audience, I'm watching the chat all the time. And I'm seeing the audience. And I'm playing off the audience. And there's a real beautiful interactive thing that we do here on this channel. It's not like anything else. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the notifications bell. People are not getting notifications. Make sure you're subscribed. YouTube has this nasty habit of unsubscribing people. Do all of that. And our show continues. I will begin my opening remarks. So I'm just going to start out with this. I'm going to start out with this. Folks, on these streams, we have often talked about the founder of modern China, the father of the People's Republic, Mao Zedong. And, we covered that a lot. And I haven't talked about that as much lately because I thought, kind of been there, done that. We talked about it. But today I was talking with a good friend of mine, and I realized that as our audience grows and evolves, sometimes you need to emphasize the basics, but also as our understanding here expands and as our ability to understand the world and how events are taking place, to analyze strategy and the nature of the objective laws of history, because of that, sometimes our understanding becomes even more rich than it once was before. So, folks, tonight I thought one of the things I would talk to you all about is Mao Zedong. First things first, this book, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, it's edited by Stuart Schramm. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this book. Chairman Mao Talks to the People. This book is interesting. Writing it down. Very good. Very, 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 very good. So, this book, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, by Stuart Schramm, this was published in the 1970s. And this is a little bit different because, there are the selected works of Mao Zedong that's published officially by China. That goes up to 1963. And those are official government statements, official presentations and speeches by Mao. Goes right up to 1963. I think the last one that they have is called Where Do Correct Ideas Come From? And then that's the cutoff point. That's the cutoff point. However, during the Cultural Revolution in China, during the final years of Mao's life, Mao gave a lot of off-the-cuff comments and speeches, a lot of off-the-cuff remarks. And those remarks are not as easy to find. But this book, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, it was compiled by Stuart Schramm, who was a British intellectual who was probably an intelligence-linked official. He had access to a lot of Chinese newspapers, etc. And so he decided to translate some of the later works of Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong on the Lin Biao affair, Mao Zedong on, the 10 great relationships. And it includes a very, very, very good presentation Mao gave in 1964. That's really just kind of a transcript of him speaking to a group of students. It's called Talk on a Question of Philosophy. And this book, the Chinese government doesn't stand by all of the things that Mao says in this book, because this was largely statements that Mao gave, talks and letters, 1956 through 1971. These are things Mao said during the Cultural Revolution. And as you know, China doesn't support the Cultural Revolution anymore. They think the Cultural Revolution was not good for China. And so they don't endorse a lot of the things Mao says in here. And so I wouldn't encourage you to read this book in order to get the official Chinese Communist line. I would encourage you to read this book if you can, or read, We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation's educational manual, where we include one of the speeches, one of the very important talks in this book, the Talk on the Question of Philosophy, that is no longer copyrighted, that is in the public domain, the English translation of it. We include that in our manual because of the fact that in this text, you get an image of Mao the person. Mao Zedong's personality comes across in this presentation. And you get a sense of a man who was a brilliant organizer, a man who knew how to talk to people, a man who was deeply in touch with the soul of his people. And you get an understanding of why Mao was able to do what he did. But let me add that many people do not realize how important Mao Zedong is as an individual. I'm telling you, folks, Lenin and even Stalin will be forgotten long before Mao is forgotten. Mao Zedong started China on the course of its great revival. And he launched China on the path of becoming what it is today. From being the sick man of Asia to being a superpower. And that political brilliance to take the country that is the largest in the world in terms of population, it was so heavily divided and so impoverished, and put it on a course of organizational rebirth is such an astronomical, dramatic achievement that Mao is going to be remembered on the level of Alexander the Great, on the level of Julius Caesar. Mao is going to be considered one of the greatest and most important figures in the history of the human race. Mao Zedong is a figure people are going to talk about for many, many, many generations. As China soars and marches ahead, Mao's face is going to be all over it. Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping have both said that China will never do to Mao what Khrushchev did to Stalin. They have studied the fall of the Soviet Union, and they recognize how demoralizing Khrushchev's secret speech was, how it just destroyed the Soviet Communist Party and its will to have the founding father, the leader who led them through World War II, who raised the country and industrialized it, to have Stalin be repudiated by his successors was such a demoralizing thing that it laid the foundations for the fall of the Soviet Union. And China will never do that. And even though Deng Xiaoping greatly changed the economic policies, and even though Jiang Zemin changed China's economic policies, and even now Xi Jinping is taking China in yet another direction, they are never going to repudiate Mao. And China, as it marches forward, is going to have Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party. It's going to have Mao Zedong thought written all over it. Even though the policies may change, the perspective may change, Mao will have left his stamp on this huge thing called Chinese civilization. And you cannot underestimate that. And as much as I wouldn't call myself a Maoist, and I think that many of the people on the internet who glorify Mao do not understand Mao. Many people who wave the little red book around, many people who love to quote Mao, do not understand Mao. They just see him as a guy with a gun. Mao, the brilliant statesman, Mao, the brilliant political organizer, Mao, the psychologist, Mao, the Marxist theoretician and dialectical materialist, Mao, the understander of the soul of Chinese civilization, Mao is going to be remembered as one of the most dynamic individuals in human history because he achieved so much. And that is why he is worth studying. There are few individuals who have had such a dramatic impact, but the way Mao did what he did was because he had an organizational brilliance that it has taken me a lifetime to really understand. Right? Again, at one point, I just thought of Mao as this guy with a gun who led a revolution, as a third world revolutionary. He was so much more than that. One time, I thought of Mao Zedong as an important communist leader. He was so much more than that. Mao stands beyond the era of modernity. He's going to be remembered in many future historical epochs. There was a level of brilliance and understanding in Mao that is very important. And there's so many different angles to understand Mao from. I'm going to talk about a couple different angles. One, Mao Zedong was heavily influenced by a tendency, a trend in Asian society. Peasant wars. You know, this is a thing that happens in feudal society. In feudalism in Europe, in feudalism anywhere in the world, wherever you have a feudal system, serfs and landowners, nobles and peasants, every so often, the peasants rise up. You have peasant wars. It's almost like a cycle, right? When the population, begins to expand, when crop output is not as high. In feudal society, there's kind of a cycle where every so often, there's not enough food to go around. Every so often, the peasants can't take it anymore, and you have peasant wars, right? It's part of the trap of feudalism, is that every so often the peasants rise up. There's a revolt. The Catholic Church talked about this in Europe. They called it millenarianism. Every so often, there's a moment in European history, in Europe in the Middle Ages, every couple hundred years, where the peasants think it's the end of the world. You have some kind of religious movement. You have people flogging themselves and whipping themselves. You have uprisings. You have landowners being killed. And it's part of the cycle of feudal society. Every so often, feudal humanity grows a little too much, and the feudal system can no longer restrain the human race. And so you have a catastrophe, and society contracts back into feudalism. And this is part of feudalism. And as long as feudalism remains, you have this kind of cycle. And one thing that happened in Europe, one thing that happened in Asia that is very interesting, this happened in Japan, this happened in Korea, and this happened in China, was that as Europeans started showing up, European ideas, and in particular religion from Europe, Christianity, would be introduced on a small scale into an Asian society. And the peasants would see Christianity and they would take it and they would completely make it their own. They would break with Western Christianity. They would completely make it their own, and they would use it as a vehicle to revolt. And the first example of that was the Shimabara Rebellion. Shimabara Rebellion. Read about the Shimabara Rebellion. Happened in 1637. Spanish missionaries went to Japan. Japan is not China by any means. Very different country. But read about the Shimabara Rebellion. In Japan in 1637, some Spanish missionaries showed up and started preaching Christianity, preaching Roman Catholicism to the Japanese people. And some of these Japanese peasants, they heard about this and they read the Bible. They read the Bible translated into Japanese, and they read, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, and Jesus is going to come again, and the Antichrist will be vanquished. And they said, you know what? Thank you, Spanish missionaries. And they took it and they used it to create a religion of revolution. And the Spanish missionaries were like, stop. That's not what it means. That is not what the Bible says. Stop that. Cut it out. Cut it out. Didn't work. And the peasants of Japan revolted against the samurai, against the nobility, against the monarchy. And they revolted. They had an uprising called the Shimabara Rebellion. The Shimabara Rebellion. And it was this widespread uprising because the peasants who had been oppressed in Japan got their hands on Christianity. They heard a little bit of Christianity. They didn't like the European Christianity. They said, we'll take this, and they revolted. And it spread all through Japan, and it was crushed very brutally. And then for 200 years, Christianity was illegal in Japan. They executed anyone who practiced Christianity because the Japanese leaders were so terrified of something like the Shimabara Rebellion happening again. That's very interesting, isn't it? In China, a few years, about 30, 40 years before Mao was born, there was an event that had a huge impact on the Chinese Revolution. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, a 14-year war in China. And what happened? What was this war about? The Taiping Rebellion. Well, very similar kind of thing. Some guy in China got his hand on a few Christian pamphlets, about Christianity. He read one pamphlet about Jesus and about Christianity, and he said, this sounds familiar. You know what? I'm Jesus's younger brother, and I am sent to build God's kingdom on earth in China. And he launched a huge rebellion against the emperor, against the Chinese government, and the peasants joined up with it, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. And for 14 years, there was a huge civil war in China where the peasants were rallying around this guy who claimed he was Jesus Christ's younger brother, and he was leading the people of China, the peasantry of China, to build a socialistic heavenly paradise to overturn feudalism. And it was a 14-year civil war in which millions of people died. And on the Korean Peninsula, this is very interesting. Korea, you'll know, was occupied by Japan. Japan was the colonizer of the Korean Peninsula, and Japan, the Japanese monarchy, practiced Shintoism. The Japanese Empire was not Christian, it practiced Shintoism. But Japan had a relationship at that point with Western countries. They could not outlaw Christianity. And so increasingly on the Korean Peninsula, when Korean people would fight against the Japanese occupiers, the main way they would organize was with Christianity. The church was this institution that the Japanese occupiers didn't particularly like because they didn't believe in Christianity, but they kind of had to tolerate it because of America and because of Europe. And so Koreans who wanted to make clear that they didn't approve of being colonized, they didn't appreciate the Japanese occupiers, would become Christian. And many of the groups on the Korean Peninsula that fought against the Japanese occupiers organized under the name of Christianity. It was a very interesting phenomenon. Mao Zedong, you can be sure, was heavily influenced by this. In fact, after Mao took power in 1949, after the Chinese Communist Party took power, one of the very first things they did was build a monument. And this monument is in Tiananmen Square. And it's a monument, I believe, to nine different episodes of rebellion. I believe it's like monument. Let me pull it up. It's called the Monument to the People's Heroes. This is a monument that exists in Tiananmen Square in China. Monument to the People's Heroes. That's what it's called. The Monument to the People's Heroes. And here, I'm going to do the Wikipedia link here. Hold on. Monument to the People's Heroes. And this Monument to the People's Heroes that was constructed, it has many different figures in China that fought against the Western occupation of China. And it's 8 different individuals who fought, for China to create modern China. And the second one is the Taiping uprising. So you can be sure that Mao was heavily influenced by this. And he knew that there was this cycle, that every so often the peasants would revolt against the landowners. And Mao was tuned into this. Mao was from the countryside, you have to remember. He was from a wealthier family that owned their own land, that had servants, etc., but they lived in the countryside. He wasn't a city boy. Mao grew up in the countryside, grew up in a rural area. He was from a family that was more well-educated. He got education. He ended up going to the city for university education. But Mao Zedong had this deep understanding of China and of the peasantry. And that many people in the 1930s, when they were visiting the areas that the Chinese Communist Party controlled, if you go and read Agnes Smedley, you ever heard of Agnes Smedley? This was an American feminist and socialist writer, Agnes Smedley. She was an American feminist who got China fever, moved to China in the 1930s, wrote books, glowing books about Mao and his revolutionary army that was fighting the Japanese invaders, etc. Agnes Smedley. Go check out Agnes Smedley. Agnes Smedley, she wrote about how she felt like Mao's movement was like early Christianity. It was share everything, hold everything in common, give your life, sacrifice everything to build a whole new country. It had a spiritual vibe to it. Edgar Snow, Edgar Snow, the journalist from Missouri, who wrote Red Star Over China, that was a best-selling book, was the first person to ever interview Mao Zedong and the last person to ever interview Mao Zedong. The journalist from Missouri, Edgar Snow. Go read Edgar Snow. He says the same thing. There was this oddly religious and spiritual vibe that one got from the Chinese Communist Party and the way they operated. It seemed like some kind of mass religious revival movement. It's fascinating. And that even though Mao was a Marxist, dialectical materialist, there was always something different about Chinese communism. It always had its own vibe. It always had uniquely Chinese characteristics, and it always had a kind of oddly spiritual, personal transformation vibe to it. It was always a little bit different than the Marxism of Europe and of Stalin. In addition to that, Mao Zedong had a particular psychological connection with young people. And this is a point that many people don't realize about Mao as well. Go to the Marxist Internet Archive. Look at Mao's works, right? Go to all works by date. What was the first essay that Mao ever published? The first published work ever written by Mao Zedong. I'm linking it right now. The first essay that Mao ever wrote, A Study of Physical Education, published in April of 1917. What in the world? Mao is writing about gym class. He's writing about why it's important to exercise in school. A study of physical education. What in the world is that about? Well, it's about the fact that Mao was a high school principal. He taught teenagers how to read and write, history, mathematics. He ran a school for teenagers. And if you look at Mao's political movement in the 1930s, when he's organizing his People's War in the countryside, it's mainly aimed at teenagers. He's telling teenagers, leave your family, leave your home, and come join my revolutionary movement in the countryside. Come fight to build a new China. And when you get here, you're going to get a new name. And when you get here, we're not going to talk about your past. You are a new person, reborn in communism. You read about this. Mao had down to a science the ability to kind of appeal to, in China, which is a very traditional, patriarchal, talk about filial piety and all of this. He knew how to appeal to Chinese teenagers. He knew the anger, the frustrations that young people have. He knew the desires that young people have, the aspirations that they have. And he built the Chinese Communist Party by appealing to adolescent psychology. This is very interesting. That he knew young people from the time he built his New People's Study Society in the 1920s. That was originally an anarchist group, that followed the teachings of Peter Kropotkin, to the time he's building his peasant movement in the countryside up until the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution, where he's telling the young people of China, the Red Guards, to rebel against their parents. He says it is right to rebel. He understands teenagers, and China's teenagers in particular, and he knows how to rally around them. He has this deep understanding of how young people think, what teenagers want to do. Go read We Are City Builders, the CPI educational manual. Read that essay that's also included in this book, The Talk on the Question of Philosophy. And you'll understand that Mao, there's something there. This Mao Zedong, there was a brilliance to what this man did. And that we don't understand it. Mao was brilliant. He had a brilliant understanding of psychology. Mao had a brilliant understanding of his own civilization and the cycles in Chinese society. You read his report on the Hunan province. Very, very good. Very, 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 very good essay that he wrote, urging the Chinese Communist Party to make itself the leader of the peasant uprising. He saw that a peasant war was coming. It was that time of the century again. The cycle had hit again. There was going to be a peasant uprising. And he says He says, now is the time. The people are in motion. We either have to march at their head and lead them, and if not, if we trail behind them, gesticulating and criticizing, if we stand in their way and try to block them, they're going to roll right over us. It's a mighty storm like a hurricane. You read the language he writes in his 1927 report on the Hunan province. He gets it. He understands his people, his country, his civilization so much that he's tapped into it, and he sees the peasants in his home province of Hunan, the area he grew up in, the rural area, are rising up and cutting off their landlords' heads and redistributing the land, and women are suddenly becoming more involved in government and asserting themselves, and all these things are changing. And Mao says we can either make ourselves a part of this and push this and nudge this to make a communist revolution, or we can sit back and abstain. We can say, oh, they're peasants, it's not good enough, and it's going to roll right over us. It's going to roll right over us and leave us behind. It's really a powerful essay about how does one intervene in history. You read that essay by Mao Zedong, he gets it. There's a brilliance to Mao. You talk about on-contradiction that Mao Zedong wrote. I mean, there is a level of brilliance to Mao that it has taken me years to really grasp. Mao was so much more than a peasant revolutionary with a gun. He was so much more than a third world revolutionary leader with a gun. Mao was very much someone who really understood human beings. He really understood how to organize people. He really understood human psychology. He really understood the history of civilizations. He really understood, I mean, this was a political genius of the highest caliber. I gave a great presentation a few years back called Mao and American Socialists. It's one of my better classes, Mao and American Socialists. And it's got over 10,000 views here. I will link it in the chat. You should go and watch this class if you have not watched it, right? It is one of my better classes because I talk about the Chinese Revolution and its influence on America from many, many, many angles. And I talk about Mao's influence on the Communist Party USA. I talk about Mao's influence on American intellectuals like Edgar Snow and Agnes Smedley and William Hinton. I talk about Mao's influence on the Black Panthers and the Black liberation struggle. I talk about Mao and the 1970s new communist movement and the fight between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and Deng Xiaoping and the rise of Deng Xiaoping. This class I gave, Mao and American Socialists, touches on this. I've been thinking about Mao for a really long time because China is such a big deal. China is such a big deal in our world. And if we're going to figure out how to get out of capitalism and how to get to a new world, China is going to be a big part of it. China is a huge part of the new world that we're seeing. And Mao Zedong is the father of China's civilizational rebirth. And even though Mao obviously made some big mistakes, the Cultural Revolution was a disaster. You know, the Gang of Four, Mao's wife, was an awful person. And, you know, China during the Gang of Four period was horrible. Mao, there's a level of brilliance there. And the fact that Mao himself, at the time the Soviet Union was the leading communist country in the world, yet even then, Mao has a huge influence on American society, right? All of this is really, really important. And I just want to reiterate that. I just want to reiterate that to you tonight, how important Mao is and why he was brilliant. You have to understand Mao on a much deeper level. And that's one thing I wanted to get out to you tonight. Another thing I wanted to mention to you all tonight, and this is just something I've been thinking about, right? I think about different things, and often I get on here and I talk about things I think about. You know, one thing, I when I was in high school, I was in theater. I did theater, you know, and I was in 4 different musicals when I was in high school. And it was dumb. It was just, you know, high school theater, whatever. But, you know, you think about when you're in a play as a high school student, you rehearse it for months. For 2 months, you rehearse the goddamn play. One of the musicals that I was in was called The Pajama Game. Here, I'll pull the poster up. It's a famous musical from the night. Was it 1961? What year did The Pajama Game came out? It's like a 1950s musical, The Pajama Game. Right? 1957. It was a musical comedy that was on Broadway, a Broadway play that came out in 1957. I was in it. in high school. Here, I'll put the poster on there. It's a musical. It's just one of these dumb Broadway musicals, and that's kind of how I saw it. I was in it. I had a role in it. 1957, the Pajama Game, starring Doris Day, the music. But actually, if you look at the context, the subject matter of the Pajama Game, there's actually a lot there that a Marxist should think about, because the musical is about the labor movement. It's about the labor movement. It's about a town in Iowa where there's a pajama factory, and it's a musical farce. It's a stupid musical comedy. But it's about a town in Iowa, and this little tiny town in Iowa where there's a factory that makes pajamas, and the workers are in a union, and there's a new manager, a new boss who gets brought in, and there's about to be a strike. There's about to be a strike in the town. And I'm not saying it's good. It's not a profound piece of writing. That's not why I'm telling you about it. It's interesting because it is making a commentary. You're seeing the labor movement, the industrial working class, the industrial proletariat of small town America, as seen through the eyes of New York City Broadway, as seen through the eyes of Hollywood, in the time that McCarthyism was breaking. 1957, McCarthyism was starting to, things were calming down. 1954, the Montgomery bus boycott. They say that's the end of McCarthyism. And the way the musical is, you look at it, it's saying a lot. It's not intending to say a lot, but there's a lot beneath the surface. There's a lot beneath the surface. For example, it's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story. The woman who works in the factory, she's taking care of her father who's older. That's why she's working in the factory, because her father is old and can't work. She's single. She lives with her father. She works in the factory. And she falls in love with this new boss that they bring to town. And the new boss who they bring to town is portrayed as kind of a tragic, lonely figure. He's a really successful manager who can manage factories, but he's lonely. It's lonely at the top, right? And that in itself is a little bit weird. And she's a worker, and he's a boss. And they start dating each other. And they're secretively dating because she's in the union. She's a leader of the union. And he is management, and she's on the other side. It's supposed to be like Romeo and Juliet. But there's an oddly weird undertone to the whole thing. You listen to some of the language they use. Very interesting. The other thing is that the leader of the union is portrayed as a buffoon, and the workers are kind of portrayed as buffoons, right? They have the company picnic, and they're all getting drunk. And they're all, men are molesting women, and it's like supposed to be the workers are kind of slobs. That's kind of the way the workers are portrayed. It's not a very positive portrayal of the working class. And then, the big hit song is 7.5 cents. And it's basically the leader of the union and the woman, and they're adding up. They're on strike demanding a 7.5 cents raise, 7.5 cent raise. And the whole song is them adding up all the material goods that they can get, right? That they can get a new motorboat, they can get a TV set, they can get a vacuum cleaner, and they're just going over all the things they can buy if they get their 7.5 cent raise. And you listen to that, right? And the boss is this tragic figure, this dark, tragic figure. And the employees are kind of buffoons, but they're good. And you look at all of that, and then one of the bosses, like the guy who owns the factory, is supposed to be like a hardcore McCarthyist. And he hates labor unions, and he calls them darn communists, darn communists. I do. I'll answer that. He calls them the darn communists. And so the boss is like a caricature of a McCarthyist. The male hero, the male protagonist, is a tragic, high-achieving, lonely figure. The female lead is a woman with a heart of gold who's working in this factory to pay for her father, to take care of her old sick father. And the whole thing, it's odd. It's got elements of that synthetic left contempt for the working class, but it's also got elements of that anti-McCarthyism, McCarthyites or right-wing extremists. But you kind of get the idea that the working class are portrayed as just kind of people who want more shit. They want more material goods. You think about that famous kitchen debate between Richard Nixon and Khrushchev, and where Richard Nixon is saying that America is great because we have more TV sets and we have more material goods. It's the 1950s. McCarthyism is over. I mean, during McCarthyism, the Pajama Game would never have been allowed on Broadway because it was a musical about labor unions. And that would have been considered, oh my God, that's communist propaganda. But McCarthyism is ebbing. And so they have a musical on Broadway about a labor union, but they portray the workers as kind of buffoons. And they also portray the boss as a right-wing nut, But then the hero is this tragic, it's almost like a Howard Rourke, this oppressed, lonely manager who's all by himself. It's very odd. It's very, very odd. It's not a profound piece at all. It's a dumb 1950s Broadway comedy musical. But the psychology behind it is saying something about the way America was thinking, right? This wasn't The Cradle Will Rock, right? During the late 1930s, Mark Blitzstein, who was considered a very, very close fellow traveler of the Communist Party, he made a Marxist social realist musical called The Cradle Will Rock. And it's widely made fun of, right? They even made a musical on Broadway called Urinetown. It's like a spoof of it. Right? It's mocked for being such crude Marxist propaganda, right? The Cradle Will Rock, right? The boss is named Mr., and he's a greedy, big fat capitalist who looks like the Monopoly man. And, the hero is a working class guy who looks like he walked out of a Soviet painting, looks like he walked out of a Soviet painting. And, people make fun of The Cradle Will Rock, but The Cradle Will Rock, that was a Marxist, Leninist, communist, pro-labor, pro-Roosevelt piece of writing. That's what that was. That was straight up, that could have been performed in the Soviet Union, right? Mark Blitzstein, he was very close to the Communist Party USA. I think they wouldn't let him join the Communist Party because he was gay, and they had a rule that Communist Party members could not engage in illegal activity, and being gay was illegal back then. They considered homosexuality to be bourgeois decadence, but everyone knew Mark Blitzstein, who wrote The Cradle Will Rock. He was a communist, and his musical about labor unions, about Mr. in Steeltown, USA, it was very pro-union. The working class were the heroes. The capitalists were the villains. It was about social justice, and the workers are going to rise up against the bosses. Go read about Mark Blitzstein, right? That was a different time. It was anti-fascism, etc. But you watch the Pajama Game. It's a little bit different. The Pajama Game is tainted with anti-populism. It's also tainted with this kind of idea that Americans are just kind of stupid people who want material goods. They want TVs and refrigerators, etc. But right-wingers and capitalist bosses are also stupid because they're McCarthyists and they don't want to negotiate, and they're cheap bastards. And, I think there's a time study man in the musical. And it, and then it talks about the isolation of like a smarter person, right? An intellectual, this manager, this boss, the main character, right? I think there was a hit song from that era that comes out of the Pajama Game. Hey there, you with the stars in your eyes. It's like a love song, but it's supposed to be about how lonely this manager, this tragic hero, this manager of the factory is. It's, you look at it all, it's like it shows how the American perspective on things like labor unions was changing during that era. And I have been, as I walk around, I was in the Pajama Game. So for 2 months, I rehearsed it. I was in it. So the play is in my mind. I can remember dialogue from it. When you're in a play and you rehearse it over and over and over again, it kind of sticks with you. And in the context of everything we talk about on these streams, about the synthetic left, about the popular front, about McCarthyism, about the American working class and the aristocracy of labor, I think about it and I realize that to some degree or other, even though the Pajama Game is not very political in its content, other than, the boss being a McCarthyist, other than it being about a labor union, it doesn't seem like a very political piece. It is a highly, highly political piece of performance. I mean, it is really showing a shifting attitude toward the American working class. You have to remember, nowadays, we don't have much of an industrial working class in the United States. There aren't very many factories. There used to be a lot. There still are some, right? There's medical supplies. There's a huge medical supplies factory in Baltimore. There's, there's auto plants still. We still have industrial labor in the United States, but it's not what it once was. It used to be that was where most Americans worked. They worked in factories. That used to be, they worked in steel mills, they worked in meat packing plants, they worked in garment factories. Americans worked in factories. Now they don't, right? That is just not the way things are. We do have labor in the United States. We have industrial labor. We have a huge service sector. But as far as factories making shit, other than weapons, we make a lot of that. We make a lot of weapons here still. There's a lot of weapons manufacturing, but most of that is done by robots. A lot of that is just done by robots at this point. There's not as much human labor even in the making of weapons as there once was. So, it's interesting to think about. And I just wanted to reflect on that briefly. And then that led me to the way I wanted the last thing I want to do in my opening remarks here before we get to the super chats is I want to talk to you all about Aaron Copland. Aaron Copland was another composer, an American composer who was part of the Communist Party. He was a very good friend, ally, probably a member of the Communist Party USA. And Aaron Copland, he composed music that is often used in cowboy movies, right? He did the hoedown. Aaron Copland was known for composing very American Western cowboy music, but he was a communist. And he was blacklisted during McCarthyism. But during McCarthyism, he actually, even though he was blacklisted, he still didn't stop composing. He maybe didn't get paid as much for it, but he kept doing it. He was an artist. He did a great thing, which is he composed a piece of American folk songs. This is really brilliant. He took a number of American songs that are folk songs that are popular among the American people, and he composed them with a classical orchestra behind them and a tenor soloist performing them. And if you look at all of these songs that he picked, they were all popular American songs, but they all had something vaguely progressive about them. They were all celebrating the working class. They were all celebrating the progressive side of the American people. And he was subtly using things that Americans already believed, using songs that were already widespread among African Americans, among, country people in the United States. He was taking aspects of the American soul that were progressive, and he was using them to make a subtly communist political point. And it was very brilliant. They talk about how the folk revival of the late 50s and early 60s was largely the work of the Communist Party. Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie. It was the Communist Party. They had this notion that within the American people, there are progressive notions There's progressive aspects of American culture and American society, and that is what we want to push. That if we are going to have any chance of beating McCarthyism, beating the drive toward fascism and McCarthyism, we have to kind of tap into feelings that the American people have that are kind of in line with us. It's kind of a brilliant thinking. And when you think about Mao, right? At this beginning of this stream, I started talking about Mao Zedong and how brilliant he was because he understood China and he made Marxism relevant in China by making it a vehicle for the peasant movement, and how Christianity, when it came to Asia, suddenly it became a vehicle for peasant uprisings, and that ideas can take on different meaning in different contexts, right? That Mao understood his own people and his own civilization, and all of that. All of this is really important. So on that note, before I do the roll call and before I start answering super chats, I want to play a couple of Aaron Copland's American songs, because I want you to understand what I'm getting at here. So I'm going to put some Aaron Copland. I'm going to put some tenors performing Aaron Copland's interpretation of American songs. I'm going to put that on, and we'll listen to some Aaron Copland music, and then from there, I will start answering super chat questions. So there you go. All right, this first Aaron Copland, this is called The Boatman's Dance, and this is a song. This is a popular American song, but this is The Boatman's Dance as performed as written as part of his American Songs compilation by Aaron Copland. We'll play another one after this. Yeah, that's the Boatman's Dance, which is That's just like an old-timey song about, men who work on ships, basically, work on ships that go down, that ship products on the Ohio River, maybe on the canals. But he made it into, he gave it kind of a vibe. If you listen to that song, what he did with it, he gave it kind of a nice vibe. Now, the next song I want to play for you, this is also from Aaron Copland, and his um, his rendition of American songs. This next one I want to play for you. This is a song this is much more political than the Boatman's Dance. This is the song. I talk a lot about the Second Great Awakening, right? I talk about that on here. The Second Great Awakening, the great spiritual movement that laid the basis for the Civil War, this great religious awakening, this revival that laid the basis for abolitionism and the struggle to defeat slavery, that kind of set the stage for Lincoln to get elected president, and the Civil War. And that, there were many different religious sects that emerged during the Second Great Awakening. And one of those sects was led by a woman, which is interesting. You don't think of religious sects or religious, fanatical religious movements being led by women. But the Shakers were a religious movement that was led by a woman. And they wanted to build God's kingdom on earth. They set up, these utopian communities all over New England and places like Ohio and Pennsylvania. They were called the Shakers. All right. And the reason they called them the Shakers was that they would have yes, Funky's the person who joined CPI today, by the way. I didn't know if Funky wanted me to announce that, but she just announced it. So power to the people. We're so glad to have you, Funky. Welcome. And the Shakers were this religious movement that kind of swept the United States in the 1800s, led by a woman trying to build a utopian civilization. And this song, this song that Aaron Copland included, this was the anthem of the Shaker movement. And it's now just considered to be a general American hymn called Simple Gifts. But it was really Aaron Copland who made it popular. It was not a popular hymn at the time that he composed. It was associated with this bizarre religious sect led by a woman, which was at that time religious groups led by women. That was like a taboo. But yet, you had, Simple Gifts, which was the answer to the Shakers. And Aaron Copland dug up this old hymn that was associated with this kind of utopian socialist religious group called the Shakers. And he popularized it in the 1950s. He used it in his Appalachian Spring, which was a big composition he did, but he also just composed his own version of it. So I'm going to play Simple Gifts. So this is the Aaron Copland version of Simple Gifts. So here we go. Simple Gifts. Just got to find it. Yeah, here we go. This is Aaron Copland's version of Simple Gifts.
Tis the gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed to turn. Turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right. 'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight.
That was Aaron Copland's interpretation of the anthem of the Shaker movement, which he clearly was promoting because it was a utopian socialist movement, because it was a pacifist movement. During McCarthyism, for him to put forward this anthem by a group of utopian socialist Christians, by a group of utopian Christians who refused to fight in wars and were pacifists, he was making a very big statement. Was making a very, very big statement by doing that, right? And again, he could have just played some communist song, but no one would have listened to it. He had to find something within the American people. He had to make himself relevant in the American discourse. Now, this last song I'm going to play from the Aaron Copland, stuff. This is actually a more lighthearted song, and this is an old like folk, like a fun folk song. But if you listen to the original version of this fun folk song, right, the tune is different. He adjusted the tune. This is a song called Bought Me a Cat, which is one of those like kids fun folk songs. It's been in America for many years. Bought me a cat, the cat pleased me, whatever. But, and it gets longer and there's doing animal noises. But he made it optimistic. I want you to listen to this because if you listen to the regular version of the song, which is just kind of, bought me a cat, cat pleased me. He changed it to make it optimistic and socialistic and utopian. He adjusted the music to make it better. This isn't, if you go and listen to the original version of this song, it's just kind of, a hillbilly, bought me a cat, cat pleased me. He changed it to make it optimistic, to make it Stalinist, to make it utopian revolutionary socialism. He took just kind of a silly hillbilly song and he gave it like an optimistic vibe. Here, listen to how he changed the tune to this song. It's really profound what Aaron Copland was doing in this piece. It's really brilliant. I mean, he doesn't change the words. He doesn't even really change the song that much, but he took the tune and he twisted it to make it revolutionary. I mean, it's just brilliant. I don't know how to explain it any further. So here we go.
Bought me a cat, my cat pleased me. I fed my cat on the yonder tree. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a duck, my duck pleased me. I fed my duck on the yonder tree. My duck says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a goose, my goose pleased me. I fed my goose on the yonder tree. My goose says quack, quack. My duck says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a hen, my hen pleased me. I fed my hen on the yonder tree. My hen says shimmy check, shimmy check. My goose says quack, quack. My duck says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a pig, my pig pleased me. I fed my pig on the yonder tree. My pig says griffy, griffy. My hen says shimmy shack, shimmy shack. My goose says quack, quack. My dog says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a cow, my cow pleased me. I fed my cow on the yonder tree. My cow says moo, moo. My pig says griffy, griffy. My hen says shimmy shack, shimmy shack. My goose says quack, quack. My dog says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a horse pleased me. I fed my horse on the yonder tree. My horse says neigh, neigh. My cow says moo, moo. My pig says griffy, griffy. My hen says shimmy shack, shimmy shack. My goose says quack, quack. My dog says quack, quack. My cat says fiddle-a-fee. Bought me a wife, my wife pleased me. I fed my wife on the yonder tree. My wife says, honey, honey. My horse says, neigh, neigh. My cow says, moo, moo. My pig says, griffy, griffy. My hen says, shimmy shack, shimmy shack. My goose says, quack, quack. My dog says, quack, quack.
See what he did there? I mean, that's just kind of a silly song, but he made it optimistic. He gave it like an optimistic vibe, an optimistic glow. It was like he was almost saying something about like that American dream of working hard, you know, and you can have your own land and you can get married and you can. It was weird. He took just kind of a silly song, a silly Appalachian folk song, and he made it optimistic. I'm going to play one more just because I'm enjoying this so much, because there's something deep here. There's something spiritual here, right? I'm going to do one more Aaron Copland song, just one more, because this last one, this again, he's alluding to the Second Great Awakening, and he's alluding to like the spiritual power of the abolitionist movement and the struggle to defeat slavery. You know, one of Aaron Copland's most famous compositions was called The Lincoln Portrait. Right. And it was just a tribute to Abraham Lincoln as the leader of the Second American Revolution. It has quotes from Abraham Lincoln that they read out loud while the orchestra is playing. And this is another performance from the the old American songs. He did this at the time all of his friends were going to jail. Okay. 1951, the height of McCarthyism, the Korean War. All of his friends are going to jail for being communists. He's blacklisted, completely locked out of any performance or anything, and yet he decides to write like this spew of patriotic songs. It's just utterly beautiful. And he did this last one, which is also a religious song, also references the Second Great Awakening. It's called Ching-a-ring Ching Ching, right? And it's supposed to be like a street preacher kind of. It's supposed to be a reference to street preachers. And, you know, and like the Second Great Awakening, the tent revival music, that's what it's a reference to. And we'll play that, and then after that I'll stop playing music, and then we'll go from there to we'll start answering super chats. But this is important, right? Because if you understand what we're doing, how much deeper what we're doing is, you know, you have to understand that this is what it means to be a revolutionary. This is what Mao understood about China, that we need to understand about America. We have to be tapped into something deeper and something spiritual within our people. There's no way we can do this by just standing on the outside and being angry. So here we go. This is Ching-a-ring Ching Ching.
Ching-a-ring Ching Ching, oh a ding ding dong lucky. Ching-a-ring Ching Ching, oh a ding dong lucky. Brothers gather round, listen to the story of the promised land and the promised glory. You don't need to fear if you've got no money. You don't need none here to buy you milk and honey. They're riding style, coachmen for white horses. Their evening meal has 1, 2, 3, 4 courses. Ching-a-ring ching ching ching-a-ring ching, oh a ding dong lucky. Ching-a-ring ching, oh a ding dong lucky. Nights we all will dance to the harp and fiddle, waltz and jig and prance, cast off down the middle. When the morning comes, all is grand and wonder, stand out in the sun and hear the holy thunder. Brothers, hear me out, the promised land's a coming, dance and sing and shout, I hear the marks are strumming. Ching-a-ring ching ching-a-ring ching 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 ching.
All righty. So there you go. That was what I was trying to show you about. It all fits together. What I was telling you about Mao, what I was telling you about the Pajama Game, what I was telling you about Aaron Copland, it all fits together. Take what you need and leave the rest. All right. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And now we will do the roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who we got with us tonight? We're doing the roll call. We are doing the roll call. We got Mariah and says, my heart, oh God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Psalm 57, 7. Very good. Yonatan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Klaus Kinski in Germany. Killian in Milwaukee. St. David's, Bermuda. Rupert from England. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Phil in Miami. Riverside, California County. Zach in Virginia. Go subscribe to him on TikTok. He's doing great stuff. Carlos in Anaheim, right? We got Gonzalo from Argentina. Would love to join CPI, but he's currently living in Argentina. Jenny in Cincinnati. Kelly in Maine. We got Catalonia, Spain. Great talk. I'm glad you like it. Gabby in Chicago. Arcology. I don't know where that is. Temple City, California. Lori in Oklahoma. Gateway to San Juan Islands. John McCarthy in Chicago. High Level, Alberta County, Alberta, Canada. Jimmy Doors Garage. London, Clinton Fraser. Bob Troy in New York. Briggy in Pennsylvania. We got a great crew here, don't we? We got a great bunch of folks who watch these streams. We got Ryan under yonder tree. Good reference there. We got Ferris from Bromley, England. Christian in Bergen County. Kirby in Chattanooga. Welcome, Kirby. Welcome, Kirby. Welcome, Kirby. Welcome. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We are having a great time tonight, aren't we? This is great. This is really, really great. This is good stuff that we're doing here. This is great stuff. Oh, Carlos, thank you for your super chat, Carlos. It is deeply appreciated. David Fox is on the road to Mildura, Australia. Very, very good. You're on the road. Christian from Bergen County is with us. Very, very good stuff, folks. So, folks, I will just say what I've been saying at the beginning of the super chat section of the show lately. I will repeat myself. I've been pointing out that it tends to be afterwards that people watch this show. People, the majority of people who watch this program, they watch it tomorrow, they watch it the next day, they watch it later in the week. But you that are here now, the people that are watching right now, have a very special privilege in that you are watching this live. So you have the ability to impact how the show goes. You have the ability with your super chat to direct the conversation. You can make the conversation go one way. You can make it go another way. So I urge you to take advantage of this special privilege that you have. You are the 1%. Well, actually, you're more like the 10%, the 20% of the people who watch this show who are watching it live. You have the ability to shape this show in your own image, right? You have the ability to craft this TV or this YouTube program to push it one way, push it another way. So what I would urge you to do is to send me a super chat about whatever you want me to talk about and utilize this special opportunity you have to craft, to move and mold this show the way you want. If there's something you want me to touch on, send me a super chat. That is my advice to you. And now I'm going to start answering super chat questions. The first one is monopoly capital restricted to cartels and conglomerates? If one person owns more than 51% of it, is it monopoly capital? The way our economy works at this point is that major corporations tend to be on the stock market. They tend to be corporations that are chartered. They have a corporate charter and they sell stock. So they have multiple owners. Is it possible that you could have a huge multinational corporation with one person owning 51% of the stock? Of course. The reason that it is a monopoly is because it is dominating the global economy, because it is a huge concentration of wealth, that the export of capital is when corporations are sent all over the world. McDonald's is exported all over the world. Under the industrial capitalism, we exported products. Now we export corporations. American corporations are exported all over the world. We don't export French fries. We export McDonald's, right? That is the nature of it, that American and Western corporations spread their tentacles across the planet. That's the export of capital, as Lenin defined it, where corporations based in Western countries dominate the global market. And is it possible that some of the monopolistic corporations based in the Western countries that hold back development, that dominate foreign markets, but some of them could have a 51% shareholders? Of course, right? It's not about how the corporation is set up necessarily. It's about the role that it plays. However, the stock market, joint stock ownership is a big part of that. The creation of the corporation, the stock market, the way U.S. law is set up, that was a big part of transitioning to imperialism, right? As we moved away from the dominance of industrial capital. So there we go. Next question. Which Michael Parenti book is your favorite? Which should I read first? Okay, I will. It's hard to answer this question, right? If you ask me which Michael Parenti book is my favorite, I would say probably The Assassination of Julius Caesar, because that book shaped my understanding of Bonapartism, my understanding of Roman history. That book was really meaningful for me in understanding, Shakespeare, the perspective he puts forward in his play, how wrong it is, the history of ancient Rome, etc. However, I almost don't want to name that book, because that book by Michael Parenti, it won all kinds of awards. And the reason it won so many awards is because it was the only thing Michael Parenti wrote you couldn't get in trouble for. Michael Parenti is just a beloved political scientist. He's really loved in the political science world, but his books are very controversial. He wrote a great book about Yugoslavia, To Kill a Nation, but that book, goes against the standard U.S. foreign policy narrative. It defends Milosevic, so of course they can't give him an award for that book. He wrote a number of books that are great on many topics. Super Patriotism is a great book. Make Believe Media. I mean, there's many great books by Michael Parenti. However, many of those books they were scared to give awards to. So the Julius Caesar book, because it's written about ancient Rome, nobody is, there's not like people, they're not worried about offending the descendants of Mark Antony. And so they could publish the book. They could give him an award. And he won, it was like the 2004 Book of the Year award. He won all kinds of like decorations for that book. And it makes me mad, because the only reason he won awards for that book and not other books that he wrote was because that book was it was about ancient Rome. It wasn't about modern politics. So if you're looking for a book by Michael Parenti that will teach you the most, I would read Black Shirts and Reds. That is a book. It's 4 essays he wrote about the Soviet Union, World War II, about the 20th century. And they're 4 essays that just use statistics and data to debunk the common narrative. There's one essay about fascism. There's one about what fascism actually is. There's one essay about how the fall of the Soviet Union created an economic disaster. We're told that the fall of the Soviet Union should have been a free market paradise, but actually it had the opposite impact. That's pretty good. There's a chapter on Stalin and how what we think we know about Stalin is wrong. That was very, very good. And I can't remember what the other one was about, right? There's the one about Stalin, the one about the fall of the Soviet Union, the one about fascism, and there's another essay in there. It's like 4 essays that he wrote, Black Shirts and Reds. That's what I would recommend you start with, because, that Michael Parenti book, that's where you'll get his defense of Stalin. That's where you'll get his, his defense of the Soviet Union. You'll get his analysis of fascism. That's the book I would recommend. Why can't we have bullet trains in America? It takes me 1 hour and a half to get to work. Americans fatigued of this system. Very good. Tomorrow is my birthday, 28. Congratulations, Gabby. Congratulations on your birthday. Happy birthday. All righty. Next super chat question. Have you read Peter Limbaugh's Many-Headed Hydra? I have not read Peter Limbaugh's Many-Headed Hydra. Maybe you want to give a follow-up comment about why I should read this book, why it's important. Often I get questions like that. Have you read and I haven't. Now, sometimes I have, but that book, Peter Linda, I'm going to Google it. I have never heard of this. Peter Linbaugh or Linebaugh, Many-Headed Hydra. Never read this book. Not familiar with it. Verso. Okay. Haven't read it. Haven't read this book. Not familiar. Not familiar with it. If you recommend it, maybe leave a comment. Let me ask, have you read Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution? Because I wrote that. And that book, I think it's making a big difference. The reviews just keep piling in. Everyone who reads this book says it really has an impact on their thinking. There's a lot of information in here. This is not a vague podium pounding. This is not just me just preaching to the choir. There's a lot of complex points in here. I think you ought to read this book. And if you've read it, send a review to Amazon. Go and write a review on Amazon, or make a YouTube video about it, or write a review for your blog, or do something, or tweet about it. But I think that more people need to read this book. I really do think more people need to read this book and understand the concepts. Our community, the Center for Political Innovation, we have a unique understanding of the politics in the United States at this time. Kim Iverson talked about this on her show. And if you want the book, come to the workshop that we're having in June. If you're a CPI member and you don't yet have a copy, because everyone who comes to the workshop in June in Missouri will get their own copy for free of this book, because we have a lot left over from our recent conference. Everyone who came to our conference got a free copy of the book, and we have plenty left over. So if you want a free copy, you got to come to our workshop that we are having at the end of June in Missouri, because everyone who comes will get their own copy of the book. And if you already have one, you can still have one, because you can give it to a friend. So consider coming to the workshop. There we go. Next question. Could there be a revival of monarchism as people reject wokeism amid a wave of conservatism? I could answer that simply and just say no, but I'm not going to, right? I think you deserve more credit than that, because I don't think we're going to go back to monarchism in the sense of, feudalism. We're not going to go back to feudalism. We're not going to go back to being governed by, divine right, kings and queens. However, I do think that you are actually onto something. As weird as this sounds, okay? We're not going to go back to like actual monarchies. However, the psychology behind monarchies, I think, is something people are really longing for. A monarch is very much a patriarchal figure. It is a fatherly statesman or a motherly statesman. A statesman who is not a grandstanding politician who throws muds at the other politicians. A monarch is much more of it has a different place in your mind, right? It used to be the president of the country was considered to be an upstanding person. And it used to be, no matter what party he was in, Democrat, Republican, everyone in America felt that the president was the ideal person. Everybody, wanted Roosevelt. Everyone wanted their kid to grow up to be Roosevelt. Truman. Everyone wanted their kid to grow up to be Truman. Everyone wanted their kid to grow up to be Eisenhower. The president was considered to be this figure that people looked up to. Right? And even if you didn't agree with him, a lot of what the president did was not explicitly political. The president would give an award to someone who rescued an old lady from a burning building. Lyndon Johnson, very famously, there was a hurricane somewhere and there was a black neighborhood that got flooded out, and he showed up with a bullhorn and he said, "My fellow Americans, this is your president. I care about you." Lyndon Johnson was awful, but in that moment, he wasn't being Lyndon Johnson, the politician. He was being this figure, this father figure, this spiritual leader of the nation. And it used to be that was the role of the president. The president was a spiritual leader of the nation. And we have largely gotten away from that. I think at this point, especially like the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal, right? Stuff like that has gone on with many presidents, many presidents. You know, JFK was bringing prostitutes to the White House every night. They were bringing them in the back door. He loved his women and all of that, but nobody talked about it. It was just understood that wouldn't be good for the country for people to see the president as a womanizer, as a philanderer, as a sex addict. People didn't want to see the president that way. All the journalists, they all knew about it. JFK's enemies knew about it, and they said, we're not going to go there. We'll hate him. We're going to attack him as being soft on the commies. We're going to attack him for being associated with that civil rights movement. We're not going to touch that because we don't want JFK. We don't want him to be known as, that's not good for America. He's supposed to be the father of the country, right? Roosevelt was crippled. I bet you didn't know this, but Roosevelt couldn't walk. But many people in the country did not know that. Even his opponents never brought that up because they understood it wouldn't be good for the country. That Roosevelt, even if you didn't like him, the idea was that the president, you want people to think our president is strong. Our economy is bad. World War II gets going. We don't want people to think our president is a guy in a wheelchair. So even though Roosevelt was in a wheelchair, they didn't, it was this idea that we want people to look up to the president. We don't want him to seem like a weak person. And the Monica Lewinsky scandal, that was a turning point in American history because Bill Clinton, obviously, Bill Clinton had a reputation for being what he was. We all know what Bill Clinton is. And some people say Bill Clinton is worse than that. Bill Clinton, but it was a moment where the gloves came off and American culture had kind of deteriorated so much. Congress for Cultural Freedom and all of that, in the 1930s, the 1960s, that Monica Lewinsky scandal would not have been on the table. The Republican Party, they might not have liked Bill Clinton, but they wouldn't have played that card, and vice versa. The Democrats wouldn't have played that card against a Republican because it was understood the president was like a king. The president was like the spiritual leader of the nation, and we don't want to know about the spiritual leader of the nation. We don't want to think of the spiritual leader of our nation as, sucking on cigars and all that gross shit. We just don't want to see our president that way. And even if we hate him, even if we want to vote him out in the next election, we want our president to be the spiritual leader of our country. And Bill Clinton, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which wasn't just that Bill Clinton lied. Every detail about every gross aspect of his private sexual encounters with somebody that he shouldn't have done, that was inappropriate, got all over the media. And that was a moment that took a spiritual toll on all Americans. That took a psychological, spiritual toll on us, right? Even people who hated Bill Clinton. I was a kid at the time. I didn't even know about this, right? My parents, shielded me from all of this. But even at my school, even though, at my school, everyone hated Bill Clinton and all this, it hurt the country spiritually to go through that. And after Bill Clinton, you had George W. Bush, and George W. Bush was a clown. He was a clown. And in a weird way, George W. Bush was picked because he was a clown. Right? Americans, we started talking about, I remember this, that's around the Bush years, that's when we started talking about how stupid we are as a people. I'm going to start crying. This is getting me emotional. We started talking about how stupid we are as a people. They would do these polls where, 1 in 5 Americans can't even find their own country on a map. And it just started, we started thinking of ourselves as Americans as stupid. We're so stupid. We're such stupid people. We can't do math. We can't do science. We don't know geography. We started laughing at ourselves. We started not taking ourselves seriously. We stopped loving ourselves as a people. And George W. Bush was the president, and everybody knew he was a doofus. He was a doofus. And the people who liked Bush liked him because he was a doofus. They thought he was a lovable doofus. He choked on a fucking pretzel. You remember this? He choked on a goddamn pretzel. And he came out and he's like, my mother always told me to chew your pretzels before you swallow them. It was like he was a doofus And the people who liked him because he was a fucking doofus, right? And he played up what a fucking doofus he was, right? And he would put on his cowboy hat and be like, I got me a dog named Barney. And yeah, I'm cutting brush on the ranch because I'm a cowboy. I'm a cowboy. And he like, the people who liked him thought he was a doofus. The people who hated him thought he was a doofus. And the people who hated him thought he was a doofus and that all of his supporters were doofuses. And his supporters are like, yeah, we are doofuses. We love America. And if you don't like it, maybe you should move to another country because that's what we are in America. And it was like, Bush was bad for America's psychology. Very, very bad for America's psychology. Now, Obama, they tried very much to do something with Obama, right? They really, they tried to ramp up, right? They really tried to ramp up the, Barack Obama. Yes, we can. He was a hero on a white horse. And Barack Obama's presidency, it was almost like they set us up to be disappointed. It was the most demoralizing presidency. Everything he ran on, he was going to make race relations improve. By the time he left office, Baltimore had gone up in flames. Ferguson was up in flames. Donald Trump was getting elected on a platform of, supporting the police, and he's going to build a wall to drive out the immigrants. And Obama's presidency, they tried to do the whole good president that we can all respect thing, but it demoralized everyone. And then Trump, and Trump, again, Trump's a doofus. And everyone who supported Trump, they know he's a doofus, but they're mad at the government. They're mad at the establishment. They're mad at the ruling elite, and they want a doofus to get in there. They want an asshole. Donald Trump's whole thing is, I'm an asshole. You fired. Right? He's going to fire you, right? He's an asshole. He fires people. He's rude. He's going to fire you. I don't have to treat you with respect. You're a fat pig, woman. Woman, you are a fat pig. I do not have to respect you. He's a doofus. He's not a doofus. He's a jerk, right? And the American people who like Trump, they like him because he's a jerk, because they're mad at the establishment. The establishment has screwed up everything. Right. And so, and I understand why they want a jerk. They want someone to get into the government and fuck up the government because they're mad at the government. Right. That makes sense. Right. The government has screwed over Americans. So they want somebody, a jerk, who will get in there and screw it over. But all of this, and you're absolutely right, John. And now something is missing, right? And the monarchy, the concept of a monarchy, it goes a lot deeper than just the feudal title. I don't think we should have an unelected leader. I think we should elect our leaders. I don't think we should have someone who, inherits the title of leader of America for life and is ordained by God to rule over the country. I don't think we need that, right? We don't need that, right? That wouldn't be good. No one wants that. But I think it was the person who asked the question. I can't remember the name of the person who asked the question. I remember, I know who you are. Jane, that's who it is. Jane from New Zealand asked the question. And Jane, I respect you because I know that you are not, I really doubt, Jane. I don't know you. I've never been to New Zealand, but maybe you do. But I really don't think Jane wants us to go back to feudalism. I don't think she does. But I think Jane understands that there is a longing on the part of many Americans for the kind of spiritual connection and trust that used to exist for presidents, right? Before Bill Clinton, before Bush, before Obama, before Trump, people used to have a psychological security that came from this idea that the president was the president. He was a good man. He was the leader of the country. You could tell your kid, be good and study hard so you can grow up and be like the president. No one's going to say that about Bush. No one's going to say that about Trump. Study hard so your kid can be Donald Trump. You want your kid to be Donald Trump? Parents watching this, you want your kid to grow up to be Trump, right? And that the concept of a monarchy, not in the political sense, but in the spiritual and psychological sense, there is something valuable there that's lost. And if you look at China and you look at Russia, the countries that are rising right now, their leaders are that. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, they are the spiritual leaders of the country. They are far more the leaders of the country than Trump or Obama or Bush or Clinton could ever be. Right? I've been in the same room as Putin, and I've seen how Russian people look at Putin. That is a man who is sacred. Right? They might disagree with his policies, but he's sacred. He represents something deeper. Their identity as Russians is wrapped up with Putin. They can tell their kids Putin's a great person, grow up and try to be like Putin. You know, there's something there, right? And that in Russia, the presidency has not been cheapened, right? And in China, Xi Jinping, again, Xi Jinping carries with him the legacy of Mao, the legacy of Deng Xiaoping, and there is a spiritual attachment to Xi Jinping, right? And that, you know, when you talk about revival of the monarchy, no, there's not going to be a revival of the monarchy. That's not going to happen. But the psychological role of head of state that is kind of symbolized by the monarchy, the father of the country, someone you can look up to who's guiding the country in the right direction, that I think will return. And I think people are longing for that deep down. And that's the ugly thing of liberalism is it deprives people of that. You know, it deprives people of that need. And, you know, it's just like, again, we Americans, we think we're stupid. We're proud of how stupid we are. We elected Donald Trump because we hate our country so much. We hate our country so much that we want to, you know, we want a guy who will get in there and be like, you're fired. You're fired. Ugly women are fat pigs. You're bleeding from your face. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm Donald Trump. Like, people voted for Trump because they thought he was an asshole. His persona, his whole persona was that he was an asshole. Right? And, you know, as much as I think that Trump maybe didn't get a fair shake from the media and he was a little bit less pro-war, I mean, a little bit. He still did awful things like murdering Qasem Soleimani, escalating with Venezuela. But, you know, Trump was slightly better than what we have now. And that the hysteria against Trump indicates that Trump was the beginning of something possibly good. That's what this whole book is about. Marxism, MAGA, and the coming revolution. There's divisions in the ruling class. And again, not endorsing Trump. I'm telling you that MAGA represents a shift in the American consciousness and Bonapartism. That's what this book is about. Okay. This book is about, this isn't, you know, I joke that this book is a MAGA communist manifesto, but it's not exactly that. It's about as close as you can get to that. And it's, there you go. But I'm telling you, I think that Jane from New Zealand, she understands that something is lost. The American people have lost something by having our leadership be cheapened. And it has taken a deep psychological toll on us. And that there's something deeply conservative. Communism has a conservative edge to it. Xi Jinping is the father of his country. Stalin was the father of Russia, the father of the Soviet Union. People felt they had a duty. People in China feel every Chinese child is given on their first day of school a red scarf that they put around their neck. They're told that that is their little piece of the Chinese flag. And it represents their little contribution, right? You know, it represents their little contribution. It represents all the blood of all the people who died to make China what it is today. That's what it represents. And that they have a duty. They're part of a civilization. This is all really important. And when you deprive people of that, when you deprive people of having that kind of, you know, that kind of strength, I mean, you ultimately weaken them as a country. You weaken them psychologically. So I understand what you're getting at, Jane. But no, we don't want to go back to like a real monarchy. But something is missing in the fact that we can't love our government. We can't love our heads of state, that our politicians have become cheapened. All right. What do you know about Christianity in Japan, and how does it relate to the revolutionary movement of the 17th century? Well, as I said, there were missionaries. I thought they were from Spain. Maybe they were from Holland, but there were missionaries who brought Christianity to Japan in the 17th century. And that led to the peasants, you know, co-opting aspects of Christianity and launching the Shimabara Rebellion. And that also led to Japan then locking locking people out. Japan basically cut itself off from the rest of the world, fearing that foreign subversion would enter Japan. So for 200 years, Christianity was absolutely illegal in Japan. They had the death penalty for being a Christian, and the way they would execute you for practicing Christianity in Japan, fascinating story, is that they would crucify you on a beach, right? You'd be crucified, symbolically for Christ on a beach, and then the tide would come in and drown you. That was how they executed you. Isn't that fascinating? They would crucify you on the beach, and then eventually the tide would come in and you'd drown. It was an awful way to die. Can you think of a more awful way to die? Horrible, horrible way to die. What's interesting, though, is that Christianity still existed in Japan, right? It still existed. For 200 years, it was absolutely illegal. Finally, in the 1800s, it was one of the famous American Navy guys, Nelson or one of them. He went to Japan and he opened trade with Japan. He convinced the emperor to allow foreign trade to come in. Japan started to open up, and then it started to become an imperialist country. It started colonizing. It started becoming a brutal colonizer again. And as Japan opened up, right, suddenly they were allowing Christian missionaries to come in. And the story is the Catholic Church went back to Spain or went back to Japan. They were so excited. And the underground priests got up and presented to them. And what they presented to them was not Christianity. They talked about Jesus was the God of the moon and St. Peter was the God of the river, and that they had Christianity, because it had been underground and isolated from the rest of Christianity, got so mixed in with Japanese traditional religion and Shintoism that there was this whole new Christianity that had elements of the Jesus story and the resurrection, but also had a lot of traditional Japanese religion mixed into it. What the underground Japanese church had been preaching had gotten so confused and all of that. They were expecting that after 200 years, they would just be preaching regular Catholicism in Japan, and they weren't. They were not. The religion that existed as Christianity had existed underground in Japan, it had absorbed a lot of the ideas of Japanese society, and it had also developed its own theories. And when Christianity resurfaced in Japan, it had been totally reinvented. And that there are many Japanese Christians who practice a version of Christianity that holds on to those teachings. And this is very fascinating. You would not know this, but like on the Korean Peninsula, there are many Korean Christians who practice a form of Christianity that talks about reincarnation, that talks about spirits, that talks about all kinds of stuff that regular Christians don't have. It is a Koreanized Christianity. And in Japan, there are many versions of Christianity that hold on to stuff that was absorbed from the period when it was illegal, that have elements of what they call animism in it, right? And that's fascinating as well, right? And again, this is the one thing about religion is that, religion often, like Mormonism, for example. Mormonism is very much an Americanized Christianity, right? I mean, Mormonism is a version of Christianity where Jesus came to the United States. The Garden of Eden was in Missouri, and Joseph Smith found golden plates, and the Native Americans were actually Jews. And it's like Christianity adjusted and radically adopted for America, right? That's what it is, right? Mormonism is very American, right? And you talk about the temple ceremonies, and there's elements of masonry, and Mormonism, it is based in Christianity. They study the Bible. They celebrate Christmas. They worship Jesus Christ. They believe he died on the cross for their sins. But they have a whole new book, the Book of Mormon, and they believe some very America unique specific beliefs. They believe the United States is like sacred and has a destiny to rule over the world. It is Christianity that has been very, very thoroughly Americanized. It's very, very Americanized. And if you look at the aesthetic of the Mormons, you listen to some of the Mormon hymns, they very much play up how American they are. For example, Mormon hymns, like there's a lot of Mormon hymns, like, what is the one? Saints bound for ended. Our bondage it will end by and by and by. Our bondage it will end. It very much has a very like pioneer aesthetic to it, right? I believe the state of Utah, they have a holiday called Pioneer Day, which is like the Mormon holiday where they celebrate Utah's Mormon heritage. And you look at it, Mormonism is very much, it's an attempt to really Americanize Christianity and make it very, 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 very American, right? I mean, some of the hymns, right? You know, come, come, ye saints, come, ye saints, our soul. Go listen to traditional Mormon hymns. They are not like other hymns. They are very American, right? There's one of the Mormon hymns. It's called High to Kolob. Have you ever heard this Mormon hymn? It is the tune of the Irish tune, The Star of the County Down, but it's done very slowly, and it's about outer space, and I mean, it's about going out of the galaxy and stars and reincarnation. Like the last verses, there is no end to glory, there is no end to love, there is no end to priesthood, there is no death above. I'm going to put High to Kolob on. You listen to this song. This is a Mormon hymn. This is one of the Mormon hymns. This sounds way more L. Ron Hubbard than Joseph Smith. I mean, this is like, you listen to this. This is not regular Christianity, but it's Christianity with ultra American characteristics. That's what Mormonism is, right? I'm going to put High to Kolob on because if you listen to this song, you will be like, listen to the lyrics to this song, High to Kolob. I'll put the lyrics. I'll put a version with the lyrics so you can read it. Like this is, right? This is not regular Christianity, right? Here we go. This is I'm going to put it on. This is one of the like original Mormon hymns, like going back to like Joseph Smith days. This is an early Mormon hymn, and it is like outer space and reincarnation, and listen to it, right? Listen to it. I'm going to put it on because I want the audience to hear this, right? You're talking about how Christianity in Japan took on its own characteristics. Listen to this. This will blow your mind, right? And if there's anyone who's a Mormon in the audience, please don't be offended by this. I have absolute respect for your faith. You guys were amazing abolitionists. You fought slavery very heroically. You built what was kind of a utopian socialist community out there in Utah. I am not opposed to the Mormon tradition. I am not a Mormon. It's not my faith, but it's fascinating to me. But I'm telling you that it is very much a Christianity that is very heavily Americanized. So here we go. This is one of the original Mormon hymns. This is not regular Christianity, right? This is uniquely, what the hell is going on here? All right. This is very uniquely American. So let's put it on. This is High to Kolob.
There is no end to
Now, that is not regular Christianity, you know, and I say that with the utmost respect for Mormons, but that is a completely, you know, that, I mean, reincarnation, outer space, that's something else, you know what I mean? And that is, but that's, you know, again, it's Christianity taking on an American form. You had an American individual who called himself a prophet. You had a whole new book. It's a new thing, right? And I say that with the utmost respect, but I'm just telling you that, you know, that when was that written? Hi to Kolob. When was that written? It's very old. This is one of like the original Mormon hymns. It goes back many, many years, right? You know, yeah, right? One of the original Latter-day Saints hymns, right? So I don't know. Let me find if I can find a date on that song, right? Right? Yeah, it was Latter-day by early Mormon W.W. Phelps. 1842 that hymn was written. 1842. That's wild. You know what I'm saying? But that's because Christianity took on a new form. You know, I often let me just throw in there also, right? You know, Jerusalem, which is considered one of the most patriotic songs in Britain. I'll put that on too, right? It's William Blake's poem, Jerusalem, William Blake, right? It's actually a great song. It's kind of a radical revolutionary song of the bourgeois revolution, right? Jerusalem, right? But it refers to Arthurian legend, right? In Britain, many Britons believed that Jesus Christ had come to England and blessed England to rule over the world. That was a big part of British imperialist, you know, propaganda. I don't know what you want to call it. The British imperialist myth, right? Was this belief that Britain had this like sacred role in the world, that it was ordained by God. You know, and and because of that, you know, there was this belief that Jesus had come to Britain, he had blessed Britain and given it this like special, you know, special place in the world. Let me find a version of Jerusalem by William Blake I can play on here. All right, let me see if this is a version I can play. I don't want to play one that's going to get me in trouble, so I have to play like a version of it that's not popular. I can't do that one. Okay. Let me find, you know, William Blake's Jerusalem, which is this ultra patriotic song in Britain, which some people argue has an oddly socialistic tone to it, right? You know, I mean, it's considered one of the most ultra patriotic songs. Like British fascists sing it, but there's a reference to satanic mills and building, you know, Jerusalem, God's kingdom on earth, you know, and fighting against all oppression. Right? You listen to it, it's got like a very, it's almost like the French Revolution. It's got a very radical edge to it. My sword, sleep in my hand till we built, you know, heaven on earth. But it's also, it's refers to this kind of Christianity with English British characteristics, right? I mean, you could really call it that. I'm on this kick. I'm on a music kick tonight. That's fine. I got plenty more super chats to answer. Keep the super chats rolling in, but you know, we're having a good time here. Right? Art, music, this stuff is really important, right? If you want to influence people, if you want to understand, you know, the deeper things that connect people, you can't just talk economics all day. Sometimes you have to delve into the world of art and literature, emotions, passion. This kind of stuff is important, right? So here we go. Blake's Jerusalem. And then we'll go to the next question. All right. All right. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, here we go. All right. William Blake's Jerusalem. This is not the music of Blake's Jerusalem. I'm sorry. That's the poetry by William Blake, but it's not the music of the anthem. I'm sorry about that. Let me find you one I can play. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. This'll have to do. This'll have to do. Here's a version of it. This looks like it might be pretty mechanical and cold, but that's okay. It's how we got to do things sometimes. Hold on. Hold on. Right? All right. Sorry about that. That was just somebody who, put some, there was no music from Blake's Jerusalem playing there. And, you have to, this is one of the most patriotic songs in Britain. It's like America the Beautiful, but for Britain, right? You have God Save the King or the Queen, which is the official anthem. And then you have this song, Jerusalem, which has a kind of utopian, kind of socialist, but also like oddly, it references this myth of Jesus coming and blessing Britain in order to rule over the world, right? It's quite interesting. So we'll put it on here. All right. All right. English patriotic song, Jerusalem. Yeah, that is, and again, that's worth, I played it for a reason. But anyway, next question. Why did Norman Finkelstein fall out with love of Mao? Norman Finkelstein actually wrote a beautiful essay about being a Maoist. And let me see if I can find you the link. He was like an ultra Maoist, right? He said that when the Gang of Four got arrested, he didn't leave his apartment for like 3 days. He was just so devastated by it. And that he had been a Maoist. He was he wrote for the Guardian newspaper, which was a big Maoist newspaper, and that was his experience. He was a Maoist communist in the 70s. He was part of the new communist movement. And somewhere he has an essay about it, right? And about kind of how it kind of let him down, and then how, the failure, how, Deng Xiaoping came in and repudiated a lot of what the Cultural Revolution had been about, led to him kind of being demoralized, right? I have a lot of respect for Norman Finkelstein. I really do. And that, he was part of the NCM, which in this book, I talk a lot about the NCM. right? There's the Communist Party of the 1950s, and then you have the NCM of the 1970s. That's the legacy that CPI carries on. We are inheritors of William Z. Foster. We are inheritors of the new communist movement of the 70s, and we are out of the movement to the masses, right? We are trying to do, what we can do. Your take on the Beatles lyrics, if you, okay. All right. I'll write it down. We'll talk about that. I got plenty to say about that. So there you go. Why is American healthcare so expensive? Because the private insurance racket, where private healthcare insurance companies have been set up by the government, right? HMOs, they're called, that are like licensed by the government to provide insurance, have been set up, and they pay for healthcare, and they buy it from private corporations. All the hospitals and all that are private. And then insurance is also private. It's all set up in a situation where there is a motivation from big pharma, from the health insurance companies, and from the providers to do everything as expensively as possible. And many people have looked at what a ripoff American healthcare is. Not only is it not free, not only do people lose their homes for medical debt, the costs are astronomically ridiculous. Healthcare companies, from big pharma to providers to the insurance cartels that are like licensed by the government, they're all trying to milk as much money out of the whole damn thing as they possibly can. And it is really over expensive, and it is really inefficient. And there's many studies about this. If you look at what we pay, what the Americans pay for healthcare, in other countries, people pay for the exact same services, the exact same drugs for astronomically cheaper. That because it's turned into a manipulative cash cow for certain companies and corporations, we, the American people, get ripped off. I mean, it is one of the biggest ripoffs. It is a government facilitated robbery of the American people. The providers are robbing the American people. The insurance companies are robbing the American people. And the big pharma are robbing the American people. It is a ridiculous, manipulative cash cow. And it's awful. It's really, really awful. So there you go. There you go. Why can't we have bullet trains in America? It takes me an hour to get to work. Why can't we have bullet trains in America? Because we have an inefficient bureaucracy in the United States that is more concerned with protecting the interests of private corporations than providing good services. And we don't invest in our infrastructure. They talk about a balanced budget, right? It's like, oh, we can't overspend, right? If we spend too much money, that's like wasteful. Well, if you spend a lot of money on a thing like a bullet train, more people will go to work. They'll have better jobs. There'll be more businesses. It'll pay out in the long term. But that means you have to spend money in the short term to build up. That's what Roosevelt did. When Roosevelt electrified with the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? He spent a lot of money, but it paid out in that people all across Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia had electricity, right? I mean, it paid out. All the businesses that could open, all the farms that could start producing because of that. Like when you spend money on things like trains and power plants and water treatment facilities, it pays out in the long term. But you have to have a perspective, and the austerity mindset that we've got, the neoliberal economics says, oh, we're spending. We got to cut government spending. Well, that's when you don't have things like bullet trains. And the idea is, oh, everyone pays less taxes. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. When you don't have things like bullet trains, it takes them an hour to get to work, like Gabby is saying in her super chat. That's why you have problems. So there you go. I mean, you have to have a mindset that says the state has an obligation to build things like power plants, to build things like, high-speed railway, and that the state's job is to guide the economy overall. So that's a big part of like the American school of economics. It's the reason, for example, that Hamilton built lighthouses all across this country, because he knew for the USA to have a thriving economy, you needed ships to come to the United States and unload their cargo. And lighthouses made it a lot safer ships to dock, and for the USA to have commerce. And so Alexander Hamilton created a national bank that facilitated the construction of lighthouses up and down the East Coast, because there was an understanding that you need the government to build shit in order for an economy to grow up around it. Pretty basic, right? It used to be basic until neoliberalism. Most capitalist economists understood that. You need the government to run the post office. You need the government to run the prisons. You need the government to run the military. You need the government to pave the roads. You need the government to build trains. No one questioned that. All the free market capitalists, anti-communists, they all understood, yeah, we need the government to build things to maintain the economy. That was just basic. And then Alan Greenspan, Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, they all came around and they said, oh, the free market is magic. It's just capitalism is magic. The market can solve any problem. And suddenly we had things like private military contractors. What could go wrong with that? What could go wrong with that? Right? We hire private armies, private military companies to fight our wars. What could go wrong with that? Prisons for profit, right? We pay a private company to have a prison. What could possibly go wrong with that, right? Oh, schools for profit, right? Let's have private companies run our schools, pay them per child who goes there. What could possibly go wrong with that? Neoliberalism is insanity. It's insanity, right? And that it's embarrassing. Adam Smith would never have approved of this kind of thing. I mean, they take the Adam Smith logic, the economics of Adam Smith, and take it to ridiculously extreme conclusions that are not even logical. And it's weird that that's gotten now mixed in with the capitalism versus communism debate. Everyone thinks Bernie Sanders is a socialist. He's not really a socialist. He's just like a Roosevelt. He wants more of a welfare state, kind of. He's not even a full Rooseveltian. He pessimistically wants to give people free healthcare and free college. He's not even a full-on Rooseveltian. Right? There's not an optimism in it, but it's like Bernie Sanders gets described as a socialist because he says maybe the government should do what it does in most countries in the world, provide healthcare to people, provide education. He's not a socialist, but that's considered socialism because neoliberalism has infected our minds. There we go. All right. Clinton should have been impeached for killing the Iraqi children with sanctions. Absolutely, John. You are 100% correct. The sanctions on Iraq were a crime against humanity. What Bill Clinton did, the consensual acts between him and Monica Lewinsky, I mean, it was inappropriate. He shouldn't have brought it into the workplace. She was young. He took advantage of her. He was wrong to do that. But the impeachment should have been focused on killing Iraqi children. That was something that, shouldn't have been all over the news. And it cheapened and embarrassed the presidency. It was disgusting. It was a disgusting moment in our history. Is Bill Clinton not a good dude? Yep. And Hillary Clinton is a lot worse. Bill Clinton is a charismatic politician. He's very good at charming people. I mean, I have met a number of people who have been in Bill Clinton's presence, and he just knows how to charm people. He knows how to make people like him. And I think he probably on some level means well. He's just, whatever. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, is a sociopath. Hillary Clinton is a very evil, vengeful person. She's a lot like Kamala Harris. I would believe she probably has the same psychological profile as Kamala Harris. She's far more dangerous. And go read my book on Kamala Harris. I talk about that. And I really still do believe, I will tell you, there is at least one faction of people in the 2024 election that are convinced they have to get Joe Biden reelected so that Kamala Harris can become president, because there is no way she will win the presidency. Everyone hates Kamala Harris. Her vice presidency has been a joke, and she is, but they want her in the Oval Office. They want her finger on the nuclear button. And I am convinced there is a group of people that are determined to get Kamala Harris in there because they know how to manipulate her. Read my book on Kamala Harris. I go into great detail about this. There is a group of people that have they think they know how to push her buttons. They think they can manipulate her, and they want her there. And the whole country thinks Kamala Harris is cuckoo. She's less popular than Biden is, but there is at least one faction that is determined to make sure Biden gets reelected. So there's just some chance that Kamala can get into the presidency. Insane, scary, terrifying. All right. The last one that I have, last super chat I've got is, if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. The Beatles lyric, what do you make of that? Well, actually, the writer, the Marxist, like social democrat, synthetic left academic of Egyptian descent. What is his name? It is escaping me. He's British. He's a British Trotskyite. Oh my goodness. What is his name? British Trotskyite, intellectual of Egyptian descent. What is his name? His name is escaping me. He's a, he wrote Bush in Babylon. Now Tariq Ali. Tariq Ali was a British Trotskyite, and he interviewed John Lennon about that. There's the famous interview that John Lennon gave to Tariq Ali. When Tariq Ali was a Trotskyite, he wrote for this newspaper called the Red Mole, and he interviewed John Lennon, and John Lennon said what he thought, which is that John Lennon basically said, here's the interview. I'll link it right here, right? He basically said that he thought that Maoists were kind of going out of their way to offend people. They weren't putting forward a serious working class program. That's what he said. Here's the whole interview where Tariq Ali interviewed John Lennon about his ideology. John Lennon basically called himself a trot. He gave lots of money to the Workers' Revolutionary Party of Britain. Look, John Lennon was a musician, all right? He wasn't a politician, and John Lennon's politics evolved and shifted. John Lennon went through a phase where he was a Trotskyite, right? John Lennon went through a Trotskyite phase where he was giving lots of money to the Workers' Revolutionary Party, which is Jerry Healy's party in Britain, which was tied to Libya, was supporting Gaddafi. And he has one album, which is called Sometime in New York City, which every song is a political song. He has a song about Attica. He has a song for Angela Davis. The title song has a racial slur in it. It's "Woman is the N-word of the world." That's the title song. That's the opening track of the album. "Woman is the N-word of the world." Right. And like every song on that album is political, right? He has a song about the Irish liberation struggle. If you had the luck of the Irish, you'd wish you was English instead. And he went through this phase where he was a new left trot, right? And he was hanging out with the Healyites. He cut a lot of checks to the Healyites, and he also gave money to the Black Panthers because they were the main group of like black revolutionary activists in the United States. I believe there was a Marxist leader in one of the islands. I forget which island it was. It was one of the British islands, one of the Caribbean islands that had formerly been a British colony. There was a Marxist leader who got the death penalty, and John Lennon supported him. I can't remember who that was, right? John Lennon, Marxist leader. It was like one of the Caribbean islands or something. I forget who it was, but there was a Marxist leader who got the death penalty, and like John Lennon was like, campaigning to free the guy. So John Lennon had a phase, I guess you could say, where he was a trot, basically. He was a trot. Was it Michael X? I think it was Michael X. Let me Google it. Michael X. I think it was Michael X, right? I think it was Michael X. Yeah, it was Michael X, right? In Trinidad and Tobago. Michael X got the death penalty in 1975, and John Lennon had like supported Michael X. Red Mike, right? John Lennon supported Michael X in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you. The person who knew that. Thank you very much. You were right, Pittsburgh dude. It was Michael X, and Michael X got the death penalty in Trinidad and Tobago, and John Lennon had like supported Michael X. John Lennon, he went through like a phase where he was a leftist. My understanding, so I guess it culminated in the fact that the Nixon administration didn't like John Lennon. And so they started to try and take his citizenship from him, or they tried to take his green card from him. So John Lennon fought for his citizenship, but he basically made a deal with the Nixon administration that he would not play at protests against the Republican convention. 1972, you had the Republican convention, and Nixon was renominated for president. And John Lennon was supposed to be playing a big concert at the protests against the Republican convention in 1972. He agreed not to do it in exchange for getting his citizenship. And he was kind of told he needed to back off from political activism in order to get his citizenship. And then like the late 70s, he kind of disappeared from the public eye, right? Which was very interesting. And then in 1980, around the time that Ronald Reagan won the election, he suddenly had a new album called Double Fantasy that came out, and then he was murdered. And, in this book, I have an appendix that is a timeline of events from 1978 to 1981. And I talk about, the timing of John Lennon's death is very interesting. He had just come out of obscurity, Ronald Reagan had just been elected president, and he was known to be a leftist. Now, there are some people who claim he was a Republican. There is one family friend who claims that John Lennon had supported Ronald Reagan, that he had been burned out by the left, he'd gotten sober from drugs, and he was a Republican. I do not know if that is true or not. That's one person's claim. The main image of John Lennon is that John Lennon, was this leftist. He had been a trot. He had backed away from politics because the government was harassing him. The main version of events people have is that John Lennon was going to become a protester again. He was going to start protesting Reagan, and then he got offed, right? And that's why there's conspiracy theories about it. People speculate about the guy who shot Reagan, John Hinckley. He was a big fan of the book Catcher in the Rye, left a copy at the crime scene. And the guy who shot John Lennon also had a copy of Catcher in the Rye. People are like speculate about how weird that is. People say that's very weird. I don't know what to make of all of that. I do know the timing of John Lennon's assassination is very odd. He'd come back into the public eye. He had a new album, and Reagan had just been elected, and he was killed. And that, when the timing makes you go, what happened there? What happened there? The timing, we can go, what happened? We can't, and why the Catcher in the Rye thing, that's really weird. But that's all we know, right? That's all we can say is that Catcher in the Rye, that's a little strange. J.D. Salinger, and, I don't know. It's a little bit strange. That's all we can say. So, that's a little strange. Who knows, right? I mean, who knows? Again, there's this one family member who claims he was a Republican. The standard interpretation by people who have conspiracy theories is that he was going to lead protests against Ronald Reagan, that he was going to become like a big anti-war voice. Who knows, right? It's very strange. He did, in the early 70s, give money to Jerry Healy, and he was giving money to the Healyites, to the Workers' Revolutionary Party that was tied to Gaddafi. He gave money to the Black Panthers, and he went through a phase where he was very explicitly endorsing the New Left, communism, Trotskyism, and then he stopped. Right? He stopped, immigration fight, whatever, and that was that. So it's a very strange, I would say that John Lennon probably had an attachment to the Black struggle because of the fact that he was into rock and roll music, right? He knew the origins of rock music. I mean, his whole career, he was a rock musician. And rock music very much goes back to the blues, right? And that he got into rock music, long before he was famous. As a teenager, he was really into rock music when it was a new thing. And that was Black music, right? And that he had some kind of attachment to the Black struggle because he knew Buddy Holly, he knew Elvis, but he also knew where that music came from, right? He knew that it was, African-American music was the roots of rock and roll, and he knew that. So, he probably had an attachment to the Black struggle because of that. And that, the other thing, though, I mean, there's other things people talk about. John Lennon's a complex figure. He was a musician. He wasn't a political figure. And, I will say there is this tendency by a lot of people to romanticize John Lennon and make him into this like iconic, sacred figure. He was not that. All right. I mean, he beat up his wife. He was a wife beater. He very badly beat his wife. He was a heroin addict for a long time. He had a very serious drug problem. You look into him, he was an artist, a very skilled musician, but he was not, and he had a left phase because that's the way the world was. That's the way he was in particular. He was, attracted to the anti-Vietnam War movement, and he, hung out in Marxist circles for a time. But, we shouldn't think of John Lennon as Vladimir Lenin. He wasn't that, okay? He was a musician. He was a composer. Yoko, and this is important to note, Yoko is a really big Zionist. Yoko Ono is completely owned by the NGO apparatus. She has put out music albums of John Lennon to save Darfur. She has signed the every statement supporting Israel ever. She signed a list of BDS is BS. Right. She is a huge Zionist, a huge supporter of Israel, and a huge supporter of the Israeli government and U.S. foreign policy. Yoko Ono is very much a big part of the liberal George Soros NGO apparatus, and she uses every opportunity she can to make John Lennon's music and legacy part of that. I'll just tell you that. And, Strawberry Fields in Central Park, and Yoko Ono is, and John Lennon himself, who's to say John Lennon would have disagreed with that? A lot of the big names of the 60s, Jane Fonda in particular, she went that way. Right? She was like a Maoist kind of in the early 70s. And in the 1980s, she became a big supporter of Israel, right? There were a lot of people that were part of the movement. And when things changed, they became liberals or worse. So, you can't idealize these people too much. The New Left was fake, right? The New Left was fake. It was very much, the CIA was doing MK Ultra. A lot of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff, that was very much a government operation. We talk about the synthetic left on here. So I would urge people, don't fall into the John Lennon is so amazing. Don't fall into that too much, right? Right? Don't fall into that too much, right? You can recognize someone's artistic achievements, but you don't have to fall into the illusion, so there you go. Anyway, someone said, why has African Marxism had a rough time? I don't know. I wouldn't say, what do you mean? This is Africa's part of the colonized world. Marxists have led many national liberation struggles in Africa. Marxists were key in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was a hardcore tankie who praised Stalin, praised Mao, loved Fidel Castro, loved Gaddafi. Right? Angola, the MPLA, that was a Marxist-Leninist pro-Cuba. Cuba sent troops to back them. Cuba has still today, I believe, has a military presence in Angola. Zimbabwe, the struggle against Rhodesia, the white colonial settler state of the British, was led by Marxists, ZANU-PF, the Zimbabwe African National Union. They're still the ruling party of Zimbabwe. Marxism is a big deal in Africa. Right. And because it was a vehicle for colonized people winning their independence. That's really all there is to that. Has it had a hard time? Sure. The colonizers have, the imperialists have been very brutal in trying to put it down. And Marxism in Africa was divided. The late Cold War, the CIA started manipulating different Marxist factions, in Angola, Jonas Savimbi was this extremist, this anti-communist fighter in Angola who had called himself a Maoist, but he got CIA money to fight against the communist government, and you had the CIA using, American intelligence started manipulating different communist and Marxist groups in Africa against each other. That happened. But Africa is a nation, not a nation. It's a continent with a huge amount of resources. And it's got a people that are very oppressed, and they've struggled for their national liberation. Marxism has been a vehicle that they've utilized to wage their battle for national liberation. I don't know what more you want me to say about that. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana was heavily influenced by Marxism. Julius Nyerere, the founder of modern Tanzania, very heavily influenced by Marxism, very much aligned with China. China sent some of the first railroads built in Tanzania were built by Chinese volunteers. There's a whole history there. So there you go. I'm going to end the stream now. It's been fun. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families, out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses. Dare to struggle, dare to win, dare to struggle, dare to win, dare to struggle, dare to win, dare to struggle, dare to win. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Revolution is the main trend in the world today.
Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody.